January and February in the winter garden look very different than they did in years before. Today I thought I'd go through some of the things that I like to do outdoors in my winter garden and also indoors as I like to prepare for my spring and summer garden. I have a 4-season garden. You can see I'm in my greenhouse right now. So I'm still picking a lot of food out of my winter garden. One of the things that I find people often don't realize, like even my neighbor was asking me yesterday about my new greenhouse, and he was saying, oh, are you just starting seeds in there? I said, no, I absolutely grow food in my greenhouse all year round, as well as in my garden. So I want to show you some of the things that I like to pick in my winter garden. And first I'll start off in my greenhouse and then we'll go outside. Some of my absolute favorite things I have to say from inside in my greenhouse, because what I find I do in here is I usually just sort of nibble. I don't tend to, like outdoors as we get outside, you're going to see much more mature plants. Now this wasn't planned. I put up my greenhouse late, so everything's kind of still young. But I've really enjoyed just being out here and kind of just picking particularly arugula leaves. I absolutely love arugula. And in the winter, it's so much easier for me to grow arugula than it is in the spring and summer. So I'm totally taking advantage of this fact. And I've been picking arugula. My kids over here have been absolutely devouring this sorrel plant. And I have sorrel in the garden. I have a few plants in the garden and they like it in the spring, but I find they don't eat it much in the summer. So I'm definitely going to be putting more sorrel plants in my greenhouse next year because they absolutely love this. Kale is another one of them that does so well inside the greenhouse. It's one of these plants. I just pick a leaf. You can see my kale plants look like they're dying, but it's just because we've been picking them so much. So for sure, the first thing that I like to do in my winter garden is eat, and eat out of my greenhouse, and then I'll show you what I like to eat out of my outdoor garden as well. So out here I'm in my outdoor garden. This is my regular raised bed area. And I have, you can see I have some cold frames set up. I have some hoop houses, some low hoop houses or low covers, low rows, whatever you want to call them, set up. And I'm definitely still picking out here. I had been growing food outdoors in my traditional garden long before I had my greenhouse. So even if you don't have a greenhouse, you can definitely still be extending your gardening season outside. Here are one of my cold frames. You can see I have arugula also growing out here, much larger. I started this earlier. And you can see arugula is doing really well. There's snow on the ground. We haven't had a ton of snow this year, but definitely can survive pretty cool temperatures. You'd be surprised actually how well it can handle the winter. Some of the other things I'm growing in here, I have dandelion. Yes, I do. I've talked about this before. I do grow dandelion on purpose. And I have some lettuce, I have mash, I have dill, cilantro, and this pepper plant I clearly have to get rid of, which I haven't done. But I absolutely love to pick out of here as well. And because these plants are bigger, I find that I pick full plants and I will like make a salad or a dish out of them versus my smaller plants in the greenhouse. Just because they're younger, I find I just pick them and eat them as I'm sitting there. So my first thing that I like to do in my garden, harvest. That's my favorite thing to do for sure. And I get to do a lot of it in the winter, surprisingly. And if it is snowing more than this, like this isn't enough snow for me to really remove the snow from the covers, but if it had been snowing a lot, then I would be removing the snow from my cold frames, from my greenhouse, from these, just so that they wouldn't collapse and to make sure that they're still getting sunlight. But if it's just a little sprinkling of snow like this, I don't do anything. I just let it be. One of the other things that I like to do in the winter is if it's warm enough, like we've had a pretty warm winter this year, maybe you have too. If it's warm enough, like I'm not wearing a hat or gloves, which is pretty unheard of around here in January, but it's been mild. So I've been getting out here and kind of doing anything that I can to prepare for my spring garden. So I am going to build some paths here for my new greenhouse. So I've laid down some landscape fabric. I've started to bring some rocks over. I'm actually going to redo my raised beds. I will almost certainly have a video on that as I do that later in the spring, but anything that I can do just to kickstart it, I'm going to do now because it's just going to save me that much time in the spring that I can be focusing on other things like planting. Something else that I definitely do, and I was doing pretty much all weekend this past weekend, was clearing out some weeds from kind of neglected areas in my garden. we took on a crazy amount when we bought this house. We had some areas that we didn't quite finish. So unfortunately, if you leave an area unattended to in a garden, then you're going to get a lot of weeds. And anything that was going to seed, I wanted to make sure I pulled out now. I'm sure some weed seeds already fell, but at least I can try to minimize the damage. One of the other things that I do at this time of year, and maybe one of my absolute favorite things to do in the garden, is starting seeds. So I'm in the greenhouse. I'm starting a lot of my seeds in here right now because I have this space and it's just, why not use it? You can totally do this inside. I actually have a video on my whole seed starting setup. This was all inside, and the video is all shot inside before I moved it outside. It's the exact same setup. So if you want to see that, I'll have a link to that video. But really, it's now. I mean, I can be starting seeds in January and February, and in some cases, this is the right time to be starting some of your seeds. So I'm going to get into one of the other things that I like to do, which is planting my garden. But part of that plan told me that I need to be starting seeds, or that I could be starting seeds right now in my climate. And then something else that I've tried to do more of this winter is just take time and walk around my garden and just enjoy it. And just kind of see and explore and experience my garden. Because if all I'm doing is just task after task, it doesn't get as enjoyable. It's not as fun for me. And gardening for me is a hobby. I'm doing it because I love it, not because I have to by any means. I tried to make a habit more of that this winter and just kind of walk around and explore my garden. And if I see anything interesting, I might just pick it. I see some rose hips over here, so I'm going to see if I can get them. I did. And then after I've been with my plants outdoors and taking care of my garden, I like to put my attention to my spring and summer garden. So January and February, even if you live in a cold climate, is an ideal time to be planning out your garden for the spring and the summer. So even if you have no intention of ever growing food in the cold climate, it's still a really good idea to think about what you might want to grow this year. So I like to look through seed catalogs and look for really exciting varieties of herbs and vegetables and fruits that I might want to add to my garden this year. Flowers. I don't do a ton of flower gardening, but I do like some, especially edible flowers I love, but I like to throw in a little bit of color here and there. So I'm going to look through seed catalogs. I'm going to actually also go through an inventory of the seeds that I have right now and see if any of them are expired. So although seeds don't technically expire, like they don't necessarily go bad, what happens is over time they might not germinate. So you might be planting them and no sprout will come out of the soil. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on the expiry date on seeds. I go through and I see what I have, what I still want to buy, and then I actually start designing my garden. I actually use my garden planning app for this. I'm normally tech-free in my greenhouse and in my garden, with the one exception being if I'm doing something gardening related. So if I'm looking something up, or if I'm writing something in a journal or taking pictures or something like that, that is my one exception to when I allow technology in the garden. So I'm just drawing out my garden and I'm deciding what kinds of plants that I want to grow. After I design my garden, after I draw it all out, then I get my schedule. I get my actual dates that I need to plant. So I like to start my seeds indoors, or I do start my seeds indoors and outdoors in January, February, March, because I actually have a planting schedule that tells me that I'm supposed to be doing that. Before this, I had no idea when I was supposed to be planting everything, and I typically just planted everything in April or May when the garden centers opened, but that's not really a good idea for some plants, like cool weather plants like lettuce and peas and things like that. If you want to grow some of those, late spring, the same time you're planting your tomatoes and your peppers, that's not the time to be doing it. So taking the time in January and February to plan your garden, that's actually going to give you better chance of success. And that's really been one of the main reasons that I have had such success. So there's a number of reasons that I've had really good success in my garden these last several years, but planning and actually following a schedule that is suited for my climate has been a huge game changer, in my opinion. And now that I've done everything that I need to do in my winter garden, I'm just going to sit and enjoy some of my homemade homegrown tea. So I talked about it in one of my last videos. I like to preserve a lot of my own food. That's one of the ways that I like to eat seasonally in the winter, and dehydrating or drying has to be one of my favorites. Pretty obsessed with drying and dehydrating things, actually. So I have some chamomile and lemon balm in this tea, and both of those came from my garden. So it's pretty cool that I get to enjoy some of my homegrown food year round. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear what you're doing in your garden in the winter, if you're doing anything, or even if you're planning out your spring and summer garden. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.